Now to an incredible find overseas, an elaborate series of stone monuments believed to have been hidden for thousands of years, not far from the famous site of Stonehenge.
Now, a new analysis shows that the 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge originated from northeastern Scotland.
If I tell you that Stonehenge was not just a monument made by standing a few huge stones in the ground, then what? Maybe you'll think, what's new in that? But just think about it. Around it are 56 holes that were almost ignored for centuries. Now, there is a claim that the distance between these holes may be connected to a particular cycle of the moon, which lasts about 18.6 years. But the story doesn't end there. When the entire structure of Stonehenge was looked at from the perspective of sound, some places appeared inside it where the effect of sound seemed different from other areas, and surprisingly, cremated human remains have also been found around those same areas. And then comes the biggest question. Could the entire area around Stonehenge also have been part of a plan that had already been prepared hundreds of years before this monument was built? Today, we will connect all these clues one by one. And after reaching the final clue, perhaps your view of Stonehenge will never be the same again. Before we move ahead in the video, please subscribe to the channel so that you can watch such videos first. Stonehenge has been standing on the land of England for almost 5,000 years. In all this time, countless generations have come and gone, but one question is still where it was. After all, why was it built? From a distance, it looks like just a circle of some very large stones. But when you go a little deeper, the story becomes quite interesting. Especially its blue stones, which were brought here from the area of Western Wales, hundreds of kilometers away. At that time, there were no modern vehicles, no cranes, and no machines like we have today. Yet these heavy stones were brought from so far away and placed at a particular location. We often think of the people of that time as just ordinary Neolithic farmers. But the question is, were they really as ordinary as we have always thought? An AI-based analysis that emerged in 2026 tried to look at this same question from a different perspective. The idea was to bring together information collected not over just a few decades, but over nearly 3 centuries, records of old excavations, geophysical scans of the ground, different surveys, astronomical calculations, and archaeological data related to Stonehenge. The job of AI here was not to give some magical answer. The real point was that humans often look at only one part at a time. But when thousands of measurements and records from different periods are looked at together, perhaps connections can appear that cannot be seen when the data is lying separately. And the most interesting thing is that this analysis did not begin with the huge standing stones that everyone considers the identity of Stonehenge. It began with the very thing that had probably received the least attention for centuries, the 56 small holes around Stonehenge. Now we come to the part of Stonehenge that was perhaps ignored for the longest time, the 56 holes around it. These are called Aubrey Holes. They were named after the 17th century man John Aubrey, who was the first to record them. These holes were made inside the outer circle of Stonehenge. Some of the holes contained human cremation remains, while some were completely empty. The strangest thing was that the distance between them was not the same. So for a long time, it was believed that perhaps the people of that time simply did not measure them very precisely. After all, nearly 5,000 years ago, they did not have measuring instruments like we have today. But when the positions of all 56 holes were looked at together, the story started to change a little. In the AI analysis, the location of every hole was compared across the entire circle of about 87 meters. It was not just the distance from one hole to another, but the relationship between all the holes that was looked at together. And this is where a pattern was claimed to appear that did not look like simple random spacing. Their spacing appeared to show a wave-like or sinusoidal pattern. After this, the pattern was compared with a particular movement of the Moon. The Moon's orbit does not remain completely straight and fixed. Its orbital tilt changes over time, and this change completes one full cycle in about 18.6 years. In other words, the Moon's position slowly changes and then returns to a similar kind of cycle after about 18.6 years. Now, there is one number worth noticing here. Multiply 18.6 by 3 and you get 55.8, which is almost 56. So, were these 56 holes just 56 holes? Or had someone inside Stonehenge actually recorded 3 complete cycles of the Moon on the ground? That is the question that makes this whole story even more mysterious. Now just think about it. If these 56 holes were really connected to the movement of the Moon, then how did the people who made them get this information? Today, understanding the Moon's orbit, its movement, and its changes is not very difficult for us. We have computers, telescopes, and years of scientific data, but nearly 5,000 years ago, none of this existed. At that time, someone simply had to keep watching the night sky. The Moon does not rise from the same place every day, nor does it set in the same place every day. To understand these changes, they would have had to keep watching the positions of moonrise and moonset for many years. And just watching was not enough. They had to remember these changes, record them, and then understand that these changes were part of a larger cycle. Now think about how difficult it would have been to bring this information onto the ground. If someone tried to show this movement of the Moon through the positions of holes in a large 87-meter circle, they would need a good understanding not only of astronomy, but also of measurement on the ground. And here is another very important point. This work was probably not done by just one person. One person may have watched for a few years, then the next generation may have continued the same observation. After that, someone else may have added their own knowledge. So the knowledge may have moved forward something like this: watching to understanding, to telling the next generation, to watching again, to and finally turning it into stone and earth. Interestingly, by the late 17th century, around the time of Edmund Halley, scientific understanding of the lunar nodal cycle was being formally developed. But the claim is that some kind of possible lunar pattern existed at Stonehenge much earlier than this. But if these people were recording the Moon on the ground, one question still remains. Was Stonehenge built only to be seen, or was there also something there that was meant to be heard? Now, for a moment, take yourself about 5,000 years back. Imagine that you are standing right in the middle of Stonehenge. All around you are huge sarsen stones, and heavy stone lintels are connected above them like one continuous circle. When we try to understand this entire structure in its original form today, its shape becomes even more interesting. The diameter of the sarsen ring is believed to be about 33 meters. So this was not just an open circle of stones, but a closed geometry where sound could behave very differently from an open field. When an acoustic simulation was done on this structure, the possibility of certain frequencies becoming stronger appeared. This also included the range of around 95 to 120 Hertz. Keep in mind, this frequency is not outside the range of human hearing. It can be heard, but low-frequency sound and resonance can affect the body and mind in different ways. In older experiments, Vic Tandy and Tony Lawrence also investigated the possible connection between low-frequency sound and some unusual perceptual experiences. However, this does not prove that people experienced hallucinations at Stonehenge. But it does raise an interesting question. Was the sound at this place simply heard, or could it also be felt? And then another thing appeared in the simulation. Sound does not spread equally throughout Stonehenge. In some places, reflected sounds can combine with each other and create standing waves, which can make the acoustic intensity higher at certain points. Now, if these particular points are placed alongside the locations of human bones and cremation remains found in the archaeological records, a strange picture starts to appear. For the first time, the locations of the stones and the locations of the dead were appearing on the same map. Until now, we had two separate things in front of us. On one side were areas of Stonehenge where, according to the acoustic simulation, the effect of sound could have been stronger. On the other side were human cremation remains found around those same areas. But did the two really have any connection? At Stonehenge, the cremated remains of at least 63 people have been identified. These are believed to date from around 3100 BCE to 2500 BCE. What is important is that these remains were not spread completely randomly across the site. Many remains were buried here during certain construction phases. This is where the story becomes interesting. When the possible hotspots from the acoustic simulation were compared with the archaeological records, an overlap between some locations was claimed. In other words, cremation remains were also present around. The real question is much more interesting. Did these people deliberately choose those places? If the answer is yes, then the next question would be, why? Were those places considered important for some religious reason? Did the experience of sound or echo feel different when standing there? Or did the acoustic effect have some meaning for the people of that time that we simply cannot understand today? And if it was just a coincidence, then why do so many different data points appear to be so close to each other? This is the point where the story of Stonehenge stops being just a story about stones. Because now, on the same map, we have stones, sound, and human remains, all together. Stonehenge, hidden landscapes. Until now, we were looking at Stonehenge as a single place, some large stones, some pits, and people buried around them. But now, pull the story a little back and look at the whole area. The Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project did exactly this on a large scale. Professor Vincent Gaffney's team at Bradford University surveyed the landscape around Stonehenge for nearly a decade, completing it in 2020. It included different kinds of information such as LIDAR mapping, geophysical surveys, and old archaeological records. Now imagine, what would you see while standing on the ground? Maybe some earth mounds, an old earthwork somewhere, and marks of an old structure made of wood somewhere else. Seen separately, most of these things might look completely normal. But when all these features were placed together on one large map, the picture started to change. Among the burial mounds, earthworks, timber circles, and other old structures, distances and directions started to show that suggested the possibility of a large geometric pattern. This means Stonehenge may not have been a separate project, standing alone in this landscape. And this is where the biggest twist in the story comes. Some important structures and features in this landscape are dated to around 3500 to 3000 BCE. That means they existed many centuries before the large Sarsen construction of Stonehenge. So if there really was some larger plan or geometry between these places, the question changes. Maybe the landscape was not created for Stonehenge. Maybe Stonehenge was included in a landscape whose story had already started long before it. And now the real question was, were the stones built later continuing that old plan? Or did the people who built them themselves not fully understand that plan? Usually, we look at history like a straight line. In the beginning, humans knew less. Then they learned from experience, improved their technology, and passed even better knowledge to the next generation. But in the story of Stonehenge, the picture seems somewhat opposite. When different construction phases were looked at along with their dates, the early work appears more accurate in many places. The precision seen in the early arrangement of the blue stones around 2400 BCE was compared with the later Sarsen construction. In some measurements, the early positional error was reported to be around 3.2 centimeters, while in the later stages, this difference increased to around 12.7 centimeters. That is almost 4 times the difference. But the matter does not stop at the position of the stones. English Heritage's 2012 laser scan records recorded 833 different tool marks on the surfaces of the Sarsen stones. Looking carefully at these marks, the early work is said to show a more consistent technique. Different and overlapping techniques can be seen on the later stones. In some places, it looks like the stone was shaped first, the work stopped, then started again much later, and finally was completed by another group. This means the next generation may have had the result of the earlier work, but the complete technique or reason behind it was perhaps not as clear. And here, Andrew Chamberlain's skeletal analysis is also important. Among the available skeletons, there does not appear to be any major biological difference between the later builders and the earlier people that would suggest that the later people were physically less capable. So, where did the difference come from? The people were the same, the stones were the same. What was changing was perhaps the knowledge that was being passed from one generation to the next. Usually, we look at history like a straight line. In the beginning, humans knew less. Then they learned from experience, improved their technology, and gave even better knowledge to the next generation. But in the story of Stonehenge, the picture looks somewhat opposite. When different construction phases were looked at along with their dates, the early work appears more accurate in many places. The precision seen in the early arrangement of the blue stones around 2400 BCE was compared with the later Sarsen construction. In some measurements, the early positional error was around 3.2 centimeters, while in the later stages, this difference increased to around 12.7 centimeters. That means almost 4 times the difference. But the matter does not stop at the position of the stones. In English Heritage's 2012 laser scan records, 833 different tool marks were recorded on the surfaces of the Sarsen stones. When these marks were looked at carefully, the early work was said to show a more consistent technique. On the later stones, marks of different and overlapping techniques can be seen. In some places, it looks like the stone was shaped first, the work stopped, then started again much later, and finally another group completed it. This means the next generation may have had the result of the old work, but the complete technique or reason behind it was perhaps not as clear. And here, Andrew Chamberlain's skeletal analysis also becomes important. Among the available skeletons, there does not seem to be any major biological difference between the later builders and the earlier people that could show that the later people were physically less capable. So where did the difference come from? The people were the same. The stones were the same. What was changing was perhaps the knowledge that was being passed from one generation to the next. Until now, our story had been moving around stones, pits, the moon, and sound. But the most human story of Stonehenge may be hidden in the bones of the people whose cremated remains were found here. The cremated remains of at least 63 people have been identified at Stonehenge. Their time is believed to be between around 3100 and 2500 BCE. That means these were people from the time when Stonehenge was in its early stages, and the construction of the huge Sarsen stones was still a later thing. But another interesting thing comes out in the story of these people. Scientists studied the strontium isotopes present in their tooth enamel. In simple language, when our teeth form during childhood, a small chemical signal from the soil and rocks of the area where we live remains in them. Later, this signal can help estimate which geological region a person lived in during childhood. In this analysis, the signals of at least 15 people did not match the local area around Salisbury Plain. Instead, Their isotope signals were found to be compatible with the geology of Western Wales. And this is where the story of Stonehenge connects with the blue stones again, because the blue stones were also brought to Stonehenge from the area of Western Wales. This does not mean that these 15 people were the same people who picked up the blue stones in Wales and brought them to Stonehenge. We do not have such direct evidence. But one thing definitely catches attention. An important source of the stones was Western Wales, and the childhood of some people also appears to be connected to the same geological region. Now the question is whether these people reaching Stonehenge was just a coincidence, or whether they had some special connection with this place. And in the next clue, this connection is going to become even more interesting. By now, several different clues have come in front of us. But when we put them together, the story suddenly becomes much more interesting. On one side, there is Wales, from where the blue stones of Stonehenge were brought. On the other side, there are the people whose isotope signals match the geological region of Western Wales. And on the third side, there are the possible acoustic hotspots inside Stonehenge, where, according to the simulation, the effect of sound could have been different from the rest of the place. Now, an attempt was made to look at all three of these things on the same map. A total of 15 individuals were identified whose isotope results were said to be compatible with the geology of Western Wales. And among them, the cremated remains of 9 people were claimed to have been found within around 1.2 meters, Wales to blue stones, to Wales origin people, to acoustic hotspots. But the most important thing here is that this overlap should not be taken directly as a definite conclusion. It is not necessary that these people were buried there because of their voices or acoustic properties. It is possible that those places had some other religious or cultural importance. It is also possible that there was no real connection at all between the burial pattern and the acoustic pattern. But if this was not just a coincidence, then the question becomes much bigger. Did these people who came from Wales have some special connection with Stonehenge? Do their burial locations show some old tradition or cultural connection? Or did the builders of Stonehenge actually know something about the acoustic properties of those places? Right now, we do not have a definite answer to these questions, but the next clue is even stranger than the identity of these people, their age. Now, another thing comes into the story, which may be more human and disturbing than all the other clues. We just talked about the people whose isotope signals appear to be connected to the area of Western Wales. But when their age profile was looked at, another kind of pattern was claimed to appear. 2 age groups seem to appear more often among these people, people over 45 years old and teenagers around 14 to 18 years old. But people in the ages between them, meaning young adults and middle-aged